In 1992, 7 of Marvel's most famous comic book artists left to start their own company called Image Comics. Allow me to introduce these men individually. It was Rob Liefeld who put out Youngblood, Mark Silvestri who put out Cyberforce, Will Sportacio who put out Wetworks, Eric Larson who put out The Savage Dragon, Jim Valentino who put out Shadowhawk, Jim Lee who put out Wildcats, and of course Todd Mcfarlane who put out Spawn. And Image Comics was founded on the bedrock of creator rights, meaning that the creators themselves owned the intellectual property of these characters they created. And Image Comics would work as a collective that would be a distributor and not owner of these properties. That's a very big deal considering if you work for the big two, Marvel or DC, they actually own the intellectual property that you were creating. Image had a lot of success starting out with the dark, gritty superheroes which were very popular in the early 90s. But the failure for most of them to meet deadlines and the comic book crash of 1996 almost made this company go under in the late 90s. But the company redefined itself in the early 2000s and almost completely moved away from conventional superheroes and published more titles you expect to see in something like heavy metal with high fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. Image has firmly established itself as the third largest publisher in comics just after DC and Marvel. In 2022 is their 30th anniversary in publication. There have been so many independent comic book companies that have failed, so this is an incredible achievement. So in honor of Image's 30th anniversary, I'm gonna pull a page out of ESPN's playbook with a 30 for 30 in which I named the 30 best titles in the first 30 years of Image Comics. This is my personal list, and I do have rules about how I established this list, which I'll put in the description so I won't slow down the video trying to explain it all. I did release this earlier this year, but I made a major error, so I corrected that and I'm re-releasing it. So here we go. Number 30, Witchblade, first released in 1996. The Witchblade is a sentient gauntlet which bonds with a female host and allows her to fight supernatural evil. Witchblade was developed into a TV show running on TNT from 2001 to 2002. Some of you may know Witchblade is a Japanese anime that came out in 2006 and had about 24 episodes. Number 29, Surgeon X, a 6-issue miniseries first released in 2016. It's the story of a dystopian United Kingdom about 30 years in the future, in which a pandemic breaks out over the overprescription of antibiotics. The bacteria have mutated and have developed resistance to the antibiotics. So a right-wing fascist government called the Lionheart Party takes over. And a woman that's known as Surgeon X is an enemy of the state for dispensing experimental medications and doing surgeries to help people. If you like V for Vendetta, you'll love Surgeon X. Number 28, The Old Guard, first released in 2017. It's the story of a group of immortal mercenaries who can't die. It's one of 3 franchises from Greg Rucka that made this list, and it was made into a movie. No development hell for this franchise. It's a live-action film on Netflix that was released in 2020 of the same name, starring Charlize Theron. If you missed it, be sure to check it out because it's very good, and they're currently working on the sequel. Number 27, The Savage Dragon, first released in 1992. One of the first Image Comics released. Is the product of Image co-founder Eric Larson and is the second longest continuous running Image Comics title in its history. At the time I make this video, it's up to 264 issues and counting. Number 26, Assassin Nation, first released in 2019. It's a 5-issue miniseries and it's a dark comedy about a mob boss who survived several assassination attempts. So he hires 20 of the world's best assassins because who better to protect you from assassins than more assassins? 15 of the 20 assassins assembled die in the first issue. I liked it so much I named Assassination number 1 the top comic of 2019. Number 25, Motor Crush, first released in 2016. Told about 50 years in the future, is a story of an African-American female motorcycle racer. By day, she races in a legitimate motorcycle league, but at night, she participates in an underground league to obtain a motor-boosting chemical called Crush. The lead character on the cover, her name is Domino Swift, and she has to wind up sacrificing herself to save her ex-girlfriend from organized crime. Number 24, Rocket Girl, first released as a Kickstarter from its creators Amy Reeder and Brandon Mountclair, but picked up by Image Comics as an ongoing series in 2013. It's about a female teenage cop who's sent back in the past of 1986 to investigate a corporation who's committing crimes against time. Rocket Girl has a real strong cult following, and Rocket Girl's creators are also the co-creators of Moon Girl over at Marvel Comics. Number 23, Deadly Class, first released in 2014. This is another cult favorite, and the Deadly Class is an academy where crime families send the next generation of assassins to get trained. It did make it into live action as a TV show on the Sci-Fi Network, released in 2019, but it only survived for 1 season, about 10 episodes. But the comic series is still continuing up to 56 issues at the time I made this video and counting. Number 22, Wildcats, first first released in 1992 on that first wave of Image Comics releases. From comic legend Jim Lee, and you gotta give it to him, he knows how to design and draw characters. This is really the start of the Wildstorm Pocket Universe, which Jim Lee wound up selling off to DC. Wildcats was an animated series that was broadcast on CBS in 1994, lasting one season, about 13 episodes. On the real, issue number 1 is probably one of my favorite covers of all time. Number 21, God Country, first released in 2017. It's the story of an old man with dementia in rural Texas, and when a tornado hits his house, instead of dying, he stumbles across an enchanted sword. The sword is sentient, it restores his mind, and gives him incredible ass-kicking power. But the only drawback is the god that lost the sword wants it back, so there's going to be a showdown for it, which takes place over an incredible 5-issue miniseries. This is the breakout work of famed writer Donny Cates, and I loved it so much I named it the top comic of 2017. Number 20, Analog, making its debut in 2018. It's a near-future dystopian espionage crime story, with events taking place after the big docks, in which some of the most sensitive secrets in the world are available online on the internet for free. Think of it as WikiLeaks times 1,000,000. So since the internet is not safe for protecting secrets anymore, the world's biggest secrets have to be printed and transported by armed couriers called ledgermen. And Analog follows the adventures of one of these ledgermen called Jack McGinnis. Analog was optioned for a movie by the Hollywood director Chip Stahelski, who's famous for being the director of the movie franchise John Wick. Analog is a fantastic dystopian action drama. Hopefully it does make it to a movie. Number 19, Noctera, first published in 2021. This is a post-apocalyptic action thriller with heavy elements of horror about a future world that has plunged into permanent darkness, and the sun literally never comes out anymore. People and goods are transported by truckers called ferrymen, because lurking in the shadows are mutated monsters and bandits everywhere. Nocturna follows the adventures of one of those ferrymen, a woman named Val Riggs. This is a creation of Scott Snyder, who's most famous for his New 52 Batman run. Number 18, Chew. First released in 2009, one of the weirdest comics to ever become a hit. This comic follows the story of Tony Chu. He's a detective who gets psychic impressions from whatever he eats, which he uses to help him solve crimes. So he doesn't mind nibbling on the corpse of a murder victim to find out who done it. So you got cops, crooks, clairvoyants, and corpses. Hey, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. Like I said, a very, very strange premise. This franchise has a cult following. It was supposed to be an animated series, but it got stuck in development hell. Chew is one of those comics you don't think you would like, but then you pick it up and say, this is strangely brilliant. Number 17, Made in Korea, first released in 2021. This is a story told in the future. For some unexplained reason, humans are no longer able to reproduce. So couples who want children and can't have them are starting to buy robots that resemble kids. And these advanced AIs are made in Korea, hence the name. This is an incredible 6-part miniseries which follows Jessie, the most advanced AI ever. She's shipped to a family in Texas, but the engineer who created her back in Korea comes to America to try to retrieve her and claim her as his daughter. If you like the films I, Robot or AI, then you'll love this. Number 16, Paper Girls, first published back in 2015. One of 3 titles from comic writer Brian K. Vaughan. It's a story of 4 teenage paper girls that witness an anomaly on Halloween 1988, and they get sent to the future and get to meet their future selves. It's now a live-action web series that's being broadcast on Amazon. This may sound like a copy of Stranger Things, but with an all-female cast, but Paper Girls made its debut in comics a whole year before Stranger Things came out on Netflix. So who's copying who? It's hard to tell. Just watch both of them. Number 15, Die, making its debut in 2018. It's an epic sci-fi fantasy horror tale about 6 teens who literally disappear into a role-playing game back in the 90s, but only 5 of the 6 return. They all decide to go back into the game almost 30 years later. It feels like Dungeons and Dragons meets Jumanji meets I Know What You Did Last Summer. This franchise has a great premise and incredible execution. Number 14, Black Magic, making its debut in 2015. It's a story of a female detective named Roanne Black, but she has a big secret. She is secretly a witch. Seances, spells, all that good gravy. She gets called into a hostage situation, and it may turn out that her cover is blown. This is from Greg Rucka, who also wrote The Old Guard, and Nicola Scott, who I think is the best female artist in comics today. Number 13, We Stand on Guard, making its debut in 2015. It's a very cinematic tale told over a 5-issue miniseries by Brian K. Vaughan. It's told about 100 years in the future where America is going through a multi-generational massive drought. A false flag operation is carried out to give the USA an excuse to invade Canada and take its drinking water. But in this David vs. Goliath story, a ragtag group undersupplied Canadian insurgents fight back against the United States. This miniseries was very controversial when it made its debut because the Americans are the villains in the story. But it's a very plausible war story action thriller. Number 12, The Fix, making its debut in 2016. This is a laugh out loud, hilarious dark comedy about two bungling cops in LA, and they're also massively corrupt, and they pull off a heist that's not sanctioned by their police chief, who is also corrupt. So he sanctions them to do a high-risk drug smuggling operation through an airport, which is patrolled by a drug-sniffing dog named Checkers, who never loses. This title is a funny take on police corruption and an indictment on sleazy Hollywood excess. I named it the top overall comic of 2016. Number 11, Sex Criminals, making its debut in 2013. It became an instant cult classic and a double Eisner winner for Best New Series and Best Ongoing Series. It's one of the most raunchy and weird comics you're ever going to read. It's a ridiculous, sarcastic, fourth wall breaking story about a couple that can stop time when they orgasm together when they have sex. And they use this newfound superpower to go out and rob banks. And why? Because why not? Alright, now we're entering the top 10 Image Comics franchises of all time. Now let's change the music. Yep, I like that. Number 10 is the Department of Truth, first introduced in the year 2020. It's a brilliant detective procedure mashed up with conspiracy horror story. It's the brainchild of James Tynion IV, who won the best overall writer at the 2022 Eisners. It follows an FBI agent who was going undercover to investigate fringe online conspiracy groups to see if any of them are breaking any real laws, like flat earthers or people believe that the moon landing was fake. Along the way, he stumbles upon a secret government organization he never knew existed called the Department of Truth. And it turns out some of these conspiracies are real and it was their job to cover it up. And who is this mysterious woman that always wears red with X's over her eyes? And the director of the Department of Truth is Lee Harvey Oswald? Isn't that the guy that killed Kennedy? No, he actually didn't. This is a very timely comic book series considering that people in real life believe in QAnon and other batshit crazy stuff. So yeah, this title is absolutely a winner. Number 9, Lazarus, first produced in 2013 from Greg Rucka again. This is a dystopian bloodlust quest for power told about 100 years in the future, where the North American governments have collapsed. And in its place are strongmen who have carved up many kingdoms for themselves. And they operate sort of like the medieval kingdoms of Europe in the Middle Ages. The kingdom that we're following in the pages of Lazarus is the Carlisle family, in their quest to maintain power and gain more power against the other kingdoms, while the kids of the Carlisle family king start to bicker amongst themselves. Every family has a Lazarus, which is an enhanced being who's in charge of security. And that's who we see on the cover here. It's a woman named Forever Carlisle. She's the Lazarus of the Carlisle family. The story is told through her eyes, and she's starting to become disillusioned with the brutality of how the kingdom is run. It feels like Game of Thrones meets the Terminator. It's currently in development as a web series on Amazon, and man, I can't wait to see this in live action. Number 8, Descender, making its debut in 2015. It's a space sci-fi action hero on the run story, and it's the winner of multiple Eisner Awards. So the beautiful mind of Jeff Lemire, drawn by Dustin Nguyen, and a beautiful digital watercolor style. One day a society in the galaxy is almost wiped out by a huge giant robot, which causes a huge anti-robot backlash among organic life. And a little boy companion robot named Tim21 wakes up after a 10-year hibernation. And everybody from government officials to bounty hunters want him because the key to his DNA may be tied to the giant robot who caused all that destruction in the first place. Descender completed this story after a 32-issue amazing run. Its movie rights are owned by Sony. Let's see if it actually gets made. Number 7, Rat Queens, making its debut in 2013. It's a story of 4 female mercenaries in a sci-fi, high fantasy type of world that looks like World of Warcraft meets Lord of the Rings. But it's also loaded with tons of adult humor and sarcasm, and it definitely earns that label from its debauchery. It was nominated for Eisner for Best New Series and the winner of a GLAAD Award for its well-rounded depiction of LGBTQ characters. There was a deal to turn this into an animated series with Heavy Mail magazine, but for some reason that fell through. Hopefully it gets made into animation one day because it's a hilarious match of magic, action, and humor. Number 6, Bitch Planet. First introduced in 2014 and nominated for a Best New Series Eisner. This is a dystopian, feminist, sci-fi epic. It also functions as a dark comedy with satirical overtones. It's a future world that appears to be a utopia, and all the decisions come from a small group of white men called the Fathers. And all women must be subservient to their husbands and to all men. If they get out of line, they get arrested, they get stamped with a tattoo NC for non-compliant, and get sent off to an off-planet prison called Bitch Planet. Because how dare you as a woman think for yourself? The audacity. And this comic series is told from the perspective of those prisoners. Imagine Total Recall meets Orange is the New Black meets blaxploitation movies. This title has a strong following among left-leaning women. It's created and written by a woman, Kelly Sue DeConnick, who's the wife of Matt Fraction, who put out Sex Criminals. And there's women in real life that have got the NC tattoo as a badge of honor. And that's when you know you have cultural impact. This is sci-fi you definitely should be reading. Number 5, Invincible, making its debut in 2003. It's a coming-of-age story about a young man who gets his superpowers inherited from his father. And his world gets turned upside down when he finds out his father is a liar and not a superhero but actually a villain. This title had a very strong cult following and ran over 144 issues, but now that it's been adapted into a successful Amazon web series, it's crossed over to a larger general audience. J.K. Simmons doing the voice of his father, Omni-Man, is the best thing ever. And the show gave us a scene that became one of the most swiped memes ever. The creator and writer of this series, Robert Kirkman, is a real genius in comics, and you will be seeing more of him on this list. And Invincible, the animated series, the best animated series in comics I've seen in a very long time. Number 4, Saga, first released in 2012. It's the winner of so many Eisner Awards that I lost count, and it's the third title on this list from Brian K. Vaughan. Saga is best described as Romeo and Juliet meets Star Wars. There's a long ongoing war between a planet with people with wings on their back and its moon in which the people have horns on their head. And against all odds, two people from these different societies that are supposed to be at war with each other wind up falling in love. And they produce a kid together, a baby named Hazel, who has both wings and the horns. Both sides of the war named them traitors, and the baby is considered an abomination. They have to go on the run throughout the galaxy to escape bounty hunters, like Prince Robot, who's an AI that has a television for a head. Saga is so weird, but so good. At the time I made this video, it was up to 60 issues and still going. At the end of the day, it's the story of love persevering through adversity. And how can you not like that? Number 3, Monstrous, first released in 2015. At the time I make this video, it's up to 6 Eisner wins. The writer of this series is Marjorie Liu, and she's a Chinese-American woman and the first woman to win Best Overall Writer at the Eisners. The artist is a Japanese woman named Sana Takada, and she draws it in a style that's anime meets steampunk. It's a sci-fi, high fantasy war story. It's also a road trip with a horror element. It's supposed to take place in the early 20th century of China in an alternative universe. The lead character is a teenage girl who escaped slavery and is trying to find out what happened to her long-lost mother. And she has a mysterious psychic link with a monster inside of her. I can't stop talking about how beautifully written this is, how gorgeous the artwork is. I think it's one of the most important comics out there that will bridge the gap between traditional North American comics and manga and anime. At the time I made this video, it's about 41 issues in and continuing. 5 stars. I highly recommend this title. Number 2, The Walking Dead, first introduced in 2003. The phrase iconic gets thrown around a little bit too much, but The Walking Dead is definitely that in terms of a media franchise. Remember how I gushed about how good Robert Kirkman was for making Invincible? Well, he did The Walking Dead as well. This post-apocalyptic horror story needs very little introduction. It's the story of a police officer, Rick Grimes, who's in a coma in a hospital, and when he wakes up, the zombie apocalypse is happening, and he's able to rally and become the leader of a fortress of survivors. So the surviving humans not only have to fight against the zombies, but they wind up backstabbing and betraying each other over limited resources. And of course, power, the ultimate aphrodisiac. The Walking Dead, the comic, was an instant smash hit, and it won multiple Eisners. It was developed into a television show for AMC, which started in 2010, and is one of the most highly successful cable television shows of all time, running over 11 seasons and win all kind of Emmys. The coolest thing about The Walking Dead is how it was able to adapt what happened in the comics into the television series very easily. Issue number 19 of The Walking Dead, they introduced the character of Michonne, and then she was introduced into the television show, played by Denai Guerrilla, who also plays General Okoye in Black Panther. Issue number 27 introduces a new villain called the Governor, and this is what he looks like in the television show. In issue number 100, they introduced the biggest villain in the series ever, named Negan. This is what he looks like in the television show, and it was absolutely brutal. The Walking Dead, the comic, called it a wrap after 193 issues over about 15 years, and the television show ran for 11 seasons. Robert Kirkman is so revered for creating Invincible and The Walking Dead for Image Comics that he's the only non-founder to ever be named partner of Image Comics. I really believe that The Walking Dead saved Image Comics from the scrap heap of history by having the company concentrate its efforts on science fiction and horror and other elements and not just superheroes. Thank you for hanging there with me. I know it's been a long video, but let's get to number 1. What could it be? What could it be? To me, it's obvious. Number 1 is Spawn. Created, written, and early on drawn completely by Todd Mcfarlane. When Image's first releases in 1992, is the company's longest ongoing series. At the time I made this video, it's about 326 issues in, making it the longest ongoing indie comic of all time. It's a science fiction, action, horror thriller about an African-American lieutenant colonel in the military who does blackout missions, but he's killed in the line of duty, more like setup. And since he killed innocents, he's going straight to hell. But he strikes a deal with a demon so he can come back to Earth because he misses his wife. And the demon tricked him, and he did come back, but he came back as a hideous hellspawn. Unlike his peers, Todd Mcfarlane was able to get his book out consistently in the first year, and he brought in heavy hitters like Frank Miller and Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman as guest writers to add to the mythos. An excellent Spawn animated series was created in 1997 on HBO. A Spawn live-action movie starring Michael J. White also came out that year. It wasn't that good though. At the time I made this video, we've been waiting about 25 years for the reboot. I'm very skeptical if this is going to happen or not. I made a video specifically about that. If you don't see the link here, it'll be in the description. In celebration of Spawn issue number 300, Todd Mcfarlane did a swipe of his own Spider-Man covers 298, 299, and 300. Todd Mcfarlane has expanded the Spawn universe tremendously by giving us She-Spawn, Medieval Spawn, Gunslinger Spawn. Spawn is not just the best thing the Image ever put out, it's one of the best comic series of all time. And there's enough material here to make 20 Spawn live action movies possible. Okay folks, thank you for watching. Shown here is a recap of what I think are the top 30 Image comic franchises of all time in order. For any of these that you missed, you should be getting back issues or trade paperbacks. There's a lot of quality listed here, with Invincible, Saga, Monstrous, The Walking Dead, and Spawn at number 1. While you're here, be sure to check out one of my previous videos called The Top 20 Comics of the 2010s. I think this decade was a new golden age of creativity in comics, and 6 of the 20 entries are from Image Comics, of course. It's a long form video about 40 minutes long, so watch when you have time. This is Comic Killer 72 signing off for Comic Power, saying thank you for your time and bye bye.